Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we're back here today with another edition of Budget Magic, and I'm super excited to be playing this deck. It is so awesome, it is so much fun. We are playing a deck I'm calling Turbo Turns in Standard. So as you can see, it comes in at 57 bucks in paper, comes in at 24 bucks online. If this price is too high or too low for you, make sure to look at the article on mtggoldfish.com where we'll have an ultra budget list, it's even cheaper, and a non-budget list posted. So make sure to tune in for that if those are things you're interested in. Anyway, let's talk about this deck. It is super awesome. So basically, we are a ramp deck. So we only have a total of 7 creatures in the deck, and their only purpose is for us to ramp. We have 4 copies of Rattleclaw Mystic, 1 in a green, you get a 2/1, it can add a green, a blue, or a red. This is an important mana dork because it adds both green and blue, which are the 2 most important colors we have. We can also play it face down as a morph, 2/2, and then when we flip it up, it adds 3 mana to our mana pool. And then we can immediately tap it, so you can get a 1-turn spurt where it adds 2 additional mana, which is sometimes relevant as well. Embodiment of Spring, on the other hand, is a rampant growth on a body. Costs 1 blue mana, it's a 0/3. You can pay 1 in a green, same mana cost as rampant growth. Sack it, and search your library for a basic land, put it in the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. So I'm a little surprised that this card hasn't seen more play. It's obviously not great. It can die on turn 1 and you get no value, which is a downside compared to rampant growth. But otherwise, if you don't have any 1 mana plays, you can play this, and then on turn 2 sack it, and it's literally the same thing as rampant growth. So those are our 7 creatures, both built around ramping. But that's not all the ramp we got. We have a ton of ramp in this deck. So as you can see, our creatures were both 2 mana ramp spells. So on turn 3, we're at 4 mana. So at 4 mana, we have 8 more ramp spells. We have 4 copies of Hedron Archive, 4 mana colorless artifact, taps to add 2 mana to our mana pool, and we can sack it by paying 2 and get to draw 2 cards. So even in the late game, it still provides value if we don't need the mana. Then we also have 4 copies of Explosive Vegetation, which is 3 in a green for a sorcery. You search your library for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tap, and shuffle your library. So what we're looking to do is go from 2 mana, with Rattleclaw and Embodiment of Spring, to 4 mana on turn 3 for Hedron Archive Explosive Vegetation, to 6 mana on turn 4, where we get our 4 copies of Nissa's Renewal. Nissa's Renewal, it is 6 mana, 5 in a green. You search your library for 3 basic lands, put them into play tapped, and then you shuffle your library, and you also gain 7 life, which is surprisingly relevant. When I first saw this card, I thought it was a throwaway junk mythic, or junk rare, that wasn't going to be worth anything, or even slightly playable, but it's actually super good in this deck. I've been amazed with it. So, 2 mana for our creatures, to 4 mana for Hedron Archive and Explosive Vegetation, to 6 mana on turn 4 for Nissa's Renewal. That puts us up to 10 mana, assuming we make our land drops, on turn 5. And what are we going to do with 10 mana? This is where things get fun. 10 mana happens to be exactly what it costs for us to awaken an untapped land with Part the Water Veil. So Part the Water Veil, it's cost 6 mana, take an extra turn after this one, you exile Part the Water Veil. That's not exciting, it's just a worse time warp. When it does get exciting is when you get to 10 mana, and you can make a 6/6 haste creature and take an extra turn. So you get to make this creature immediately attack, take an extra turn, which means you immediately get to attack again, which is great. That's right by itself. If you get in with it, it's 12 damage, which is a lot. Where it gets really insane is where you can keep looping these spells and take 3, 4, 5 extra turns in your row, and we play out like a combo deck. We ramp into all this mana as quick as possible. As I said, on turn 5, if we get our nut draw, we can Part the Water Veil with Awaken. Then we try to take as many turns in a row with Part the Water Veil, which gets to awaken our lands, or Temporal Trespass, which is also pretty sweet in our deck. It costs 11 and 3 blue mana, but it has Delve, so we can exile all those ramp spells, the Embodiment of Spring that we sack, the Explosive Vegetation, the Nissa's Renewal, all those cards we get to exile to reduce the mana cost of Temporal Trespass, which means we can usually, if we have 10 mana, we can usually cast an infinite number of these spells in consecutive turns. I think the most turns I've ever taken in a row is maybe 5 or 6. And then we kill our opponent with our Awakened Lands before they ever get to untap. Then we also have 3 copies of Dig Through Time. Since we have so much mana, we can often just hardcast Dig. I've had turns where we have 19 or 20 mana, and we can hardcast Dig Through Time, find Apart the Water Veil, and cast it with Awaken on an untapped land all in the same turn. And that costs 19 mana. And we, at times, have that much mana. Basically, it can find other things, but most often, it is making sure we have 2 or 3 or 4 take an extra turn spells in our hand when we have our big combo finish turn where we go off. So these are the centerpieces of the deck. They are what make the deck so awesome. We do have a couple other cards. For Planar Outburst, this one was really important. When I started building this deck, we were like a blue-green Turbo Fog deck. And the problem was, we could awaken a 6/6 land, we could take a bunch of extra turns, but we would just get our land chumped a million times by whatever creatures our opponent had. Well, Planar Outburst, 5 mana Wrath, cast it for 8 mana with Awaken 4, and it destroys all non-land creatures. So the awesome part about Planar Outburst in this deck is we can cast our Part the Water Veil on turn 6, say, for example, awaken a land. Then the next turn, in our extra turn, we can Planar Outburst, wipe away all our opponent's creatures. It doesn't kill our Awakened Land because it only destroys non-land creatures, and we have 10 power we can immediately attack with. The 8 mana for Planar Outburst, plus 3 more mana, is enough that we can use our Temporal Trespass, exiling a bunch of things from our graveyard, to play both Planar Outburst and Temporal Trespass in the same turn, and then we're guaranteed to win the game. So Planar Outburst basically sweeps away all our opponent's creatures when we're comboing off, and makes sure our lands can get through for lethal damage. It is essential for the deck. You gotta play it. You can't play a substitute Wrath. You can't play without it. It is the change in the deck when I went from blue-green to blue-green-white, specifically for Planar Outburst, was immense. Like, it changed the entire deck. It might be the most important card in the deck, because we can combo off without it, but we don't usually kill without it. We really need the ability to sweep our opponent's creatures away to get that combo finish. The other 2 cards, one of a single Quarantine Field, and then a single Monastery Siege. So that is the main deck cards. As far as our mana base, 4 Lumbering Falls, 4 Blighted Woodlands. Those are non-basics. So Blighted Woodland is another way to ramp. It adds 1 mana. We can tap it by paying 3 and a green and sacrifice it and get 2 basics out of our deck. So really, this is sort of a late game ramp spell, but it's a nice way to get up to the really high echelons of mana to make sure we can combo off. Lumbering Falls is actually super important to the deck. One of the ways this comes into play is we don't really awaken onto Lumbering Falls, although some people think that. The idea isn't to make this big hexproof Lumbering Falls. The idea is we play a couple Lumbering Falls, and then we cast our take an extra turn Awaken spell, Part the Water Veil, get a 6/6 on one of our basic lands, and then we have so much mana we can animate 1 or 2 Lumbering Falls, and then instead of attacking over the course of 3 turns with a 6/6, or even 4 turns with just our 6/6 Awakened Land, we can attack for 9 or even 12 damage per turn by activating Lumbering Falls. So a lot of times what happens is our opponent sacks a couple of fetch lands, we awaken with Part the Water Veil, get a 6/6, attack, it puts our opponent down to 12. The next turn, we animate both of our Lumbering Falls, and we attack for exactly 12. So this is a card that gets us out of a lot of situations where we can't just take 5 turns in a row. Maybe we can only take 2 turns in a row, and Lumbering Falls gets in exactly the right amount of damage when combined with our Part the Water Veil Awaken, that we can take it down. And it is also relevant to be awakened on in some fringe cases. If you think your opponent has a removal spell, a non-sacrifice based removal spell, you can awaken onto the Lumbering Falls, and for example, it won't get hit by Stasis Snare or something like that, because we really only have to worry about instant speed removal, since once we start taking turns, we plan on winning right then. We don't plan on letting our opponent ever untap and get a chance to do anything. Rest of the mana base, lots of basics, which is necessary because we have lots of cards that search for basics, so we want to be able to get all the way up to at least 10 or 12 mana in basic lands. The sideboard, 3 dispels, 3 Feed the Clans, a Naturalize, 4 Negates, 2 Stasis Snare, and a Gaia's Revenge, which can come in and take down a control deck by surprise. We can ramp into it really quickly, and some decks just cannot deal with that. Just can't deal with a quick Gaia's Revenge. So anyway, the reason to play this deck over the more popular Eldrazi ramp decks, where you're ramping into Ugin and you're ramping into Ulamog, is we don't let our opponent untap. Those decks, I have played those decks. We have played those decks on Budget Magic even, some versions of them. And while casting in Ulamog is very good, there are definitely times where you ramp up, cast an Ulamog, exile a couple lands, and your opponent plays a removal spell like a Stasis Snare, and you still lose. Like, you can cast in Ulamog and still lose. With this build, we never let our opponent untap, so they don't have a chance to deal with what we're doing. So we're going to take 4 or 5 turns in a row and kill our opponent without them having a chance to respond, which for me is the benefit over the other decks. I've definitely seen those decks play in Ugin, play in Ulamog, and still lose. Once we start comboing off, we are very unlikely to lose. We don't give our opponent a chance to do anything to disrupt our plans. So that, for me, is the reason to play the Turbo Turns build of ramp over an Eldrazi build of ramp. The finish is just so unbeatable. Of course, you got to play around counter spells, things like that. Those can get us. It's not that this deck is unbeatable, but we go over the top of even those other ramp decks because we don't give our opponent a chance to react, and they do. So that, for me, is a reason to play Turbo Turns over like a red-green Eldrazi ramp deck. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the videos. I seriously think this deck is awesome. I had success with it, and it is just so awesome to play. Like, I know I love all the decks we play, but I love this one more than most of the decks we play, especially for standard decks. It's cheap, it's reasonably effective, and it is so awesome. Until you take 5 turns in a row, you just don't understand the feeling of how awesome playing this deck is. So you really, really should try this one. It's great for an FNM level event, and I think it could even go farther than that. I think you could play this at a higher level event. We see the ramp decks having success, and we see that this has some advantages over a traditional ramp deck. So I think that there are reasons to play this deck at a GP or at a SCG Open, or something similar. I mean, it can be tweaked, upgraded, and so on, but this basic frame of ramping into 5 turns in a row and winning the game on this huge combo finish, I think there is reasons to play that. Anyway, make sure to check out mtggoldfish.com. Not only does it have the article that has the upgrades and the ultra budget version of Turbo Turns, but it has tons of other great content, decks, prices, the metagame strategy, basically everything and anything you could want related to Magic the Gathering. And if you enjoyed the videos and all the other great videos we make here on MTG Goldfish, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can keep up on all the latest and greatest in video content. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Go out and get Turbo Turns. It's super sweet. And I will talk to you soon.